Psalm 131, very short psalm, very simple psalm, yet some important questions, actually not questions, but a question I want to ask you tonight, but based on the statements here in this psalm. Psalm 131, and we'll read the first three verses. Well, we'll read all three verses. Psalm 131, it says, Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor mine eyes lofty, neither do I exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. Surely I have behaved and quieted myself as a child that is weaned of his mother. My soul is even as a weaned child. Let Israel hope in the Lord from henceforth and forever. Let's go to the Lord in prayer as we get into the message tonight. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word and for this psalm and the statements that are made here. And as we ask the question, or as I ask a question here for everyone here tonight, Lord, I pray that you'd please help us to be able to answer this question in the affirmative. And I pray that you would please speak to every heart, encourage, strengthen, challenge, convict. In Jesus' name, amen. The question is, can you say this to God? Can you say this to God? So this is a psalm of David. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the introduction to the psalm that the commentator Albert Barnes had written. And he says, this brief psalm is entitled A Song of Degrees of David. There is nothing in it to forbid the idea that it was composed by him, for it is wholly in his spirit and manner. It is not known, however, on what occasion it was written, or why it has a place among the Song of Degrees. It would seem to have been prepared on some occasion when the author had been charged with being of a lofty and proud spirit, with meddling in matters that were above him or above his condition in life, or with making such suggestions about public affairs as were considered to indicate a self-confident or an aspiring mind. Without being able to determine this by any certain facts, the supposition which would seem most to accord with the contents of the psalm would be that it was written when he was a young man, when he had expressed in the presence of others some sentiments on public affairs which were interpreted by them as denoting a forward and self-confident spirit. If so, then this psalm was probably a private meditation on what he had done and was of the nature of a personal examination of his spirit and motives, knowing as we do what David was afterward, his great talents as a warrior and a king and his ability to manage public affairs. It would not in itself be strange or improbable that in early life, and even when a shepherd boy, he might have advanced opinions which would be regarded as beyond his age, as unbecoming his condition, as manifesting a disposition to meddle with matters above him, and that he might have been rebuked for this. If it were so, we may suppose that a pious and a modest youth would give himself to self-examination to determine whether that was the spirit which actuated him. And this psalm may have been the result of such an examination, a deep self-consciousness that such was not the spirit which influenced him, that these were not the motives which prompted him to do what he had done. And there's one thing that really does stand out, and I'm not saying this is for sure the occasion of this psalm, but one area of David's life that I can think of that he was accused of meddling in affairs that were too high for him was when he went to where his brothers were in battle against the Philistines, and Goliath was intimidating the army of the Israelites, and his brothers really questioned David being there. Oh, you've come just to see things, you've come just to be nosy. And then David's standing up and saying, why doesn't somebody take him on? And his brothers weren't really that receptive to his statements there. And that, I'm not saying that is the exact setting or the exact situation that this psalm is based on. But at the same time, that's one of the times in David's life when we do know from Scripture that he was then accused, and there were assumptions made about his motivations that it may have happened more than once. But we don't necessarily know all of what goes into the purpose for this psalm. But really, there's some very important statements in here, and we need to ask ourselves the question, can I say this to God? Can you say this to God? Just like David, he did some self-examination based on some sort of situation in his life, based on some times of life, and I can think of, hopefully you can think of some times too, where you have, based on a particular event, a particular something that is said, something that happens in your life, that causes you then to do some self-examination. I've had those times in my life, and I hope you have had too. And because those are very important times of life, that God will allow things to happen that will then prompt us to do some self-examination, and that will then, hopefully, we be honest with ourselves and come away a better person for it and come away more pleasing to God and let God having His way. And that's different from people who are always just utterly self-centered. I mean, they're always so focused on themselves and how they feel and every thought that goes through their mind. And there's some people that are just so self-absorbed. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about those times, just those seasons of self-examination, those times when things happen that prompt you to examine some things in your life. A lot of times, often, it's not usually good things that happen, it's usually negative things that happen. Maybe something is said, an accusation is made, or maybe a criticism. Maybe there's something that happens where you get hurt in life, and you just stop and you think, wow, what's going on here? I need to take some inventory in my life. And those can be very good times. But David came away saying, Lord, my heart is not haughty. So can you say these things to God? The first one he said is, Lord, my heart is not haughty. Can you say to God, my heart is not haughty? Now don't answer out loud. I'm asking a kind of rhetorical question for you to answer more on the inside. But can you say to God, my heart is not haughty? If you were to take self-examination, what would the condition, an honest examination of your heart, what's the condition of your heart? Obviously, we know the physical heart condition is very important, and the spiritual heart condition is very, very important. And so when we say my heart is not haughty, that is the inner character, the character of a person, the motivation, the deep-rooted thoughts of the heart, the deep-rooted attitude of the heart. That's the state of the inside, not just the outside, but the inside. That's where it starts. The Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And so we need to recognize that the natural tendency of our heart, the innermost core of our being, is to lead us into wickedness and to be deceitful, for us to deceive ourselves, and our heart deceives us. And so we need to be careful that, number one, that we're honest, and number two, that our hearts are not haughty, because pride can be a factor in anybody's life, and it is a great driving factor in many people's lives for bad. The presence of pride leads to bad things. The absence of pride, humility, leads to good things. And so my heart is not haughty. My heart is not haughty. The innermost part of my being. I'm not being haughty. My attitude is right. I'm not what people might accuse me of being or assume that I am in my heart of hearts. He says also, nor mine eyes lofty. Can you say this to God? My eyes are not lofty. In other words, my countenance doesn't reflect a heart full of self-serving aspirations and ambitions. When your eyes are lofty, that comes from a prideful heart where people get lifted up in their own haughtiness, and so their eyes are lofty. Not looking up into the hills from whence cometh our help. My help cometh from the Lord. Not that kind of looking up. But the person can have a look in their eyes that's just a prideful look. What does the Bible say about these 6 things that the Lord hate? Yea, 7 are an abomination unto Him. A proud look. So when a person's heart is haughty, when they're proud on the inside, it's going to be reflected on the outside, and that's an abomination to God. God hates it. A proud look. But He says, my eyes are not lofty. So I'm not self-serving. I'm just having these self-centered aspirations and ambitions. There are many people in life that it's just all about them climbing the ladder. I was reading I guess it was a blog post. It was kind of a news post. It's a blog site, but they report different aspects of news. It's a unique site. But anyway, I heard this on different, more traditional news, is that there was a man in Colorado who was going to be married, and he lost his wife or his fiancée in a car accident in February. She died in a car accident, so he was not able. Of course, there was not going to be a wedding. So he asked the photography company for a refund, and because they have to put a deposit down, but the deposit is non-refundable, and it was, I think, $1,800. And I will just say that the response of this photography is like your jaw would drop if I read to you what this photography company did, how they responded to him. I mean, the most cruel and heartless responses. And so this came after the guy went online and left a negative review for them. And so they took his money, his deposit money, bought a web domain with his name, hisname.com, put his picture on it, doctored his picture, and put just a website up basically mocking him and criticizing him, and it's just awful. I mean, it's the most awful thing. And this site, this blog site they do some deeper digging into certain things, and apparently they were connecting some dots and were suggesting there's a particular guy who is known for being a con artist and a scam artist who's probably behind this company. And as they were showing some things about this guy, you could tell he's just a self-promoter, and the world is full of self-promoters. And now, because of Twitter and Facebook, I mean, people can just tell everybody how special they are, how amazing they are. You know, he's an entrepreneur, he's this and he's that, and he's all these things, and self-promotion, and that's the way the world runs these days. There's so many people that they're full of these ideas, but they're all about themselves. Their eyes are lofty. Now, if you were to look at this guy, the picture of this guy, he would look like a pretty just normal businessman, normal guy, but you can tell what his heart is. In this case, in that picture, you couldn't really tell based on his eyes being lofty, but you can tell based on the way he operates, the things that he does, the things that he says. Now, whether or not he's the one behind those just cruel and heartless things, that remains to be seen. It's hard to say. He denied it apparently, but the guy's documented as a con artist. I mean, he was in trouble with the Attorney General of Massachusetts because he was originally from Massachusetts. He lives in Las Vegas now. So interesting situation, but I saw this guy, he has his own page or has his own site where people can book him for speeches, motivational type speeches. But, and this just for some reason, this just reeks of being lofty and haughty to me, is when people market themselves and they have their name and they put a special logo with the initials of their name. And this guy, he had like 4 parts to his name, and so the first 2 names started with J, so it was this real fancy, not real fancy, but a very simple logo, but it was supposedly, a real trendy looking logo, JJ. And he's marketing himself. He's not marketing a product or a service, he's marketing himself, that he's so special. You need to come, you need to invite me to come speak. And that's just loftiness, that's just haughtiness. And so there's people that are so self-promoting, self-serving aspirations and ambitions. And David here is saying, this is not my motivation. My eyes are not lofty. And even though David did quite amazing things. I mean, he made it to a very high position. But what does the Bible say about David? It says he was a man after God's own heart. That tells you something about David's heart. He was a man after God's own heart. There was something about David's life that he had in common with the heart of God. And first thing would be humility. Humility. He was not out to be self-serving and not out to elevate himself. Can you say that to God? If you were to go before God in prayer, if you were to examine your heart and go before God, talk to God, can you say, my heart is not haughty, my eyes are not lofty? He also says, neither do I exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. Neither do I exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. What does he mean here? Well, he's the words exercise myself. That word, that Hebrew word there for exercise myself, is used actually quite a number of times in the Old Testament. And it's usually, and it's a variety of words, but the 3 common words that I saw, it means to walk. It's also translated as go. It's also as went. So when he's talking about neither do I exercise myself, I don't go into matters that are too high for me, things that are inappropriate, things that are out of my reach. In other words, he's not so full of himself that he's getting involved in these higher level type of things for his own self-serving ambition. Because David, now the fact that, with David, even as a young man, apparently he was somebody who walked with God, he was somebody who loved God, worshiped God, and he had a lot of wisdom. He, of course, look at all the Psalms we have that he wrote. And he was somebody who was a very special person, even as a young man. He could have been accused probably quite a bit of getting involved in things where maybe he gave his opinion, maybe he gave some of his thoughts. And it'd be kind of like, just a person who doesn't have maybe a high position in life, but then they decide, then they think they can go and tell the president's team what to do. Here's my thought to the president's team. Now, the importance of that is, so he's not injecting himself inappropriately in matters that are above him. That may have been an accusation. People may have assumed that. People may have thought, oh, David, he's getting in over his head. He's getting in too deep here. Who does he think he is? He's just a shepherd boy. And so, even think about when Samuel came to Jesse and his sons to anoint a king. And of course, the thought was, the tallest, the greatest in stature, the oldest, surely this is the one. And God said, no. Samuel said, do you have anybody else? He says, we have one more, David. He's out, he's shepherd, he's out in the fields. Basically, David's there. But surely he's not the one. Well, yes, he was the one, because God had picked him out. And that's where the verse is that man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh on the heart. Is that it wasn't about the stature, it wasn't about how handsome, it wasn't about, I'm sure, David wasn't necessarily an ugly young man, but it wasn't about his stature, his age, or whatever. It was God looking at the heart of saying, here's who I'm going to use. And so David was not one who was a ladder climber. He was not trying to elevate himself into high places. He was just trying to be faithful. He was trying to serve God. And it doesn't mean, not involving ourselves in things that are too high for us, that seem to be out of our reach. It doesn't mean we don't attempt great things. It just means we're not full of ourselves and that we don't elevate ourselves trying to get to some higher pinnacle. It would be like, I was reading about there's a book on character, actually, and it just so happens the character trait that we're going through right now is humility. And the writer of the book said that he gave an example of a pastor who was not a well-known pastor, but he would have big-name pastors in to preach at his church because it made him feel more special, like he was really somebody because he's got this guy into his church. And according to the author of the book, he said, this pastor now, basically the church is struggling with just not too many people. The church shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Why? Because this pastor was involving himself, he was exercising himself in great matters or things too high for him, trying to elevate himself, trying to feel good about himself, trying to be part of that higher level. Now, if a pastor is just simply led, I think this preacher, even if it's a bigger name preacher, if this preacher is going to be good for my congregation and I can have him in, then great. You can do that in humility. You can have a bigger name preacher in humility. But there are many, not just that pastor, but there are many who they find their worth as a pastor or their stature based on their connections, based on the circles they run in. And can I tell you, I've seen that. It can be tempting to try to inject myself into that, but I've found it's hard. It's been hard for me to do. And part of it is I haven't had the desire to do that. Really haven't had the desire to try to just, or as it's said, just name drop. When I was calling pastors for scheduling meetings before we came here to Greenfield, And we were going to be traveling around presenting our ministry in different churches. And I had one or two people tell me, how about you, when you call this pastor or this pastor, you just tell him you talk to me. That's called name dropping. I couldn't do that either. Because the problem is sometimes it can backfire. You don't know. It might not be a guarantee that dropping that name is the best thing to do. You just don't know. No, I decided to approach it on the merits of, here's who I am, here's what we're doing, here's where we come from, here's what we believe, here's where we're going, and take it or leave it. I just couldn't get, I couldn't get into the name dropping. I couldn't get into the rubbing shoulders, trying to get up with the top guys, And God's given me peace about that. I'm not doing anything, I shouldn't do anything differently. But, David was not one who was out to try to get himself a big name either. And that's what we need. We need people like that today. We need, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a leader politically, whether it's a church member, it doesn't matter. A missionary, that's what we need, are just people who they're not exercising themselves in great matters or things too high for them. Now, there is a difference between being thrust into a situation and looking to do things that would be beyond what is appropriate, looking to do things that would elevate our stature. Now, David was thrust into a lot of situations. I mean, he killed wild animals, he killed Goliath, but he didn't go there to the battle just to, all right, how do I make a name for myself? No, he was going to see what was going on, and he was sent there because his father wanted him to go. But he ended up killing Goliath. Was he seeking that out when he went? No, but he realized there's a need here. There's a problem here. There's somebody who's mocking the living God. He's defying the armies of the living God. So somebody's got to do something about this. So he was thrust into that situation. And then as king, he wasn't searching out being king. He was out in the fields with his flocks of sheep, just doing what he had always done, being a good shepherd. And so we can be thrust into a situation, but be very careful about our motivations, your motivations, my motivations, about why we do what we do. That if we're going to take a stand, we're going to take some steps, we're going to do various things, that it's simply out of humility and because our hand was forced. I was thrust in. The Lord got me into this situation, and so I'm just going to follow through with His leadership, His guidance and strength. Now, Albert Barnes, the commentator, says the word wonderful would apply to matters suited to excite astonishment by their vastness or their unusual nature as prodigies or miracles, and then great and lofty truths. It would apply also to things which might be regarded as far above the capacity of a child or of one in obscure life and with slight advantages of education. And as above suggested, it may have been the accusation brought against him that in respect to public matters, matters of state, or to the more elevated doctrines of religion, he had manifested a spirit unbecoming one in early years and of humble rank, and that this indicated a desire to meddle with matters which he could not understand and which could not pertain to him. He was conscious, he says, that he was not actuated by that spirit. So it's perhaps in the things that David got involved in, it appeared he was just in way over his head. Like, this is far beyond you as a young man. Don't get involved in this. Leave this for the older, more experienced, more educated people. Don't you get involved in that. He's trying to elevate himself, and he's recognizing, he's conscious of this, that says, I don't exercise myself in great matters or in things too high for me. And then in verse 2, he says, surely I have behaved and quieted myself as a child that is weaned of his mother. My soul is even as a weaned child. Can you say, I have behaved and quieted myself like a weaned child? When is a child the most fussy and demanding? It's when they're just a baby. It's before, and what?
And hungry.
And hungry, yeah. It's when they're just a baby, and that's their expression of, I need something. I need something. Before a baby is weaned. Now, as a baby gets closer to being weaned, and then especially after being weaned, they don't approach it quite the same way anymore. Now, there may be things they do when they get hungry, but it's not the same. They don't just lay there and cry and cry. I mean, Isaiah now, he's 2, and so when he's hungry, he doesn't lie on the floor crying and screaming like a little baby. And neither did any of our other children at that age. Now, Katrina, if she needs something, she's not weaned yet. She's getting toward that point, but she's not there yet. She is more likely to be just crying and fussy. But once she gets weaned and she's just eating regular food, drinking regular milk, she's not going to be acting like that either. There's going to be a peaceful, more contented temperament as far as having the filling, having the nourishment. And just like Isaiah is just sitting there right now, contented, looking at a book. And he doesn't appear that he's hungry, and so he's weaned. He's far beyond being weaned. And so that's the idea here. He is saying, I don't have the turmoil. I'm not being demanding. I'm not being upset or angry or on the inside. He says I have behaved and quieted myself as a child that is weaned of his mother. In other words, they don't cry as much. They don't fuss and whine as much. Now, believe me, children, even after they're weaned, do their share of fussing and complaining and demanding things. But it's not the same. It's not the same when they get weaned as it is before they get weaned. And that's what he's saying here. He's just, this is my conduct is appropriate conduct. It's a peaceful, contented temperament. And my soul is as a child is weaned of his mother. And so I'm not one who is being inappropriate in my spirit. I don't have a bad spirit. I don't have the wrong spirit. I don't have a complaining, upset spirit. Can you say these things to God? Can you say these things to God? My heart is not haughty. My eyes are not lofty. I don't exercise myself in great matters or things too high for me. I have behaved and quieted myself like a weaned child. Can you say those things to God? Do you need to have you been able to say those things to God lately? Or have you done enough self-examination lately that you've looked at your own heart, looked in your own spirit, your own attitude, and you can say, I believe this is right. And we need to be quiet. We need to be careful because we don't want to be presumptuous and just be boastfully saying, oh yes, I can say these things. Now, can you humbly say, yes, I believe my own heart of hearts. I'm not going to go around telling people. But in my own heart of hearts, I can just honestly say this to God. Can you say that to God? Do you need to do some self-examination tonight? Or maybe tomorrow. There are times when that is very important and very good. Just examine your heart. Because God knows your heart. God already knows your heart. But He wants you to then honestly look at your own life. What is your attitude? What is your spirit like? Are you full of pride? Are you haughty? Do you have lofty eyes? Is it all about you? Are you self-serving? You have your own self-serving ambitions? Or are you humbly going through life, fulfilling your duties, fulfilling the various aspects of life humbly, just following the Lord, worshiping the Lord, and then just letting the Lord guide you and put you into whatever He wants you to be in? Is that where you are tonight? I hope it is. And if not, we can take this opportunity tonight, tomorrow, and the days ahead to examine our hearts and say, can I really say these things? What is in my heart that would prevent me, would hinder me from being able to say these things? Because that's where we all should want to be, is where we can get to this place where we can read this psalm and basically say it as a prayer to God. Lord, my heart is not haughty. And then verse 3 says, let Israel hope in the Lord from henceforth and forever. Never forget where your hope is. Hope is in the Lord forever. That's where we need to place our hope.